It's strange how a single weekend can change everything you thought you knew about your family. For months, I had been looking forward to our family reunion. It had been years since we were all under one roof. The laughter, the shared meals, the easy memories of growing up together. I'd spent days preparing small gifts for everyone, organizing old photos, and booking a cozy countryside villa for us to spend 3 days together. I wanted it to be special, something to remind us that family still meant something in this busy, fractured world. I arrived first. The house smelled faintly of pine and old wood, the kind of scent that makes you slow down and breathe a little deeper. I chose the place because it reminded me of my mother's old home, warm, quiet, and simple. As I unpacked groceries and arranged the dining table, I smiled at the thought of seeing everyone again. When my sister, Alina, walked in with her husband, Samir, I felt an instant rush of affection. She looked tired but happy, juggling their 2 kids and a mountain of luggage. Samir followed behind her, wearing his usual half-smirk, phone in hand, eyes flicking between screens and people. He wasn't a bad person, at least that's what I used to believe. Just careless, a bit arrogant, someone who liked to show off more than he could afford. As the rest of the family arrived, my parents, my younger brother, and a few cousins, the house filled with noise and warmth. We laughed over childhood stories, teased each other about old crushes, and argued over which movie to watch that night. I cooked my mother's favorite biryani while Alina helped with the salad. Samir opened a bottle of wine, boasting about his new business venture, something in crypto or online trading. He loved the attention, loved when people asked questions. I didn't understand half of what he said, but I listened politely, sipping tea and nodding. The first night went smoothly. We stayed up late, watching the fire crackle and talking about how fast life was changing. My parents looked content, their faces soft under the glow of the lamps. It felt like home again. The second day, however, small cracks started to appear. Samir seemed restless. I caught him several times glancing at his phone, walking away from conversations to take calls. Alina seemed distracted too, whispering to him in corners, their faces tight with quiet tension. I thought maybe it was about money. They'd been struggling a bit since Samir's last investment went wrong, though they never admitted it openly. Still, I didn't pry. Families have unspoken boundaries, and I respected theirs. That evening, while everyone sat outside near the bonfire, Samir joined me in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You've done well for yourself," he said suddenly, eyes scanning the appliances, the food, the details. I smiled, unsure how to respond. "I try," I said lightly. "I've been lucky with work this year." He nodded too slowly. "Yeah, lucky," he said, his tone unreadable. It wasn't a compliment. It was something else, a quiet envy dressed as casual conversation. I shrugged it off. I'd worked hard for what I had, building my small business from scratch after years of setbacks. There was nothing lucky about it. But I didn't say that. I just changed the topic and served the food. By the last day, everyone was tired but happy. We took group photos on the porch, hugged goodbye, and promised to meet again soon. It felt like a successful reunion. I drove home with that pleasant exhaustion that comes after a long, emotional trip. When I finally sat down and checked my messages, I noticed something strange. My banking app had several unread alerts. I frowned, assuming they were routine updates. But when I opened the app, my stomach dropped. The balance on my main account, my savings, my emergency fund, everything, was almost empty. Transactions I didn't recognize. Thousands gone, transferred over the weekend. My hands trembled as I scrolled. Each line blurred into the next. I called the bank immediately, thinking it must be a mistake. The woman on the other end was calm, professional. Too calm. She confirmed the transfers. "Yes, ma'am, these were authorized through your online account." "But I didn't authorize them," I said, voice rising. "That's impossible." She paused. "They were made from a verified device." That's when it hit me. During the reunion, my laptop had been out in the living room. Everyone had access to it. I used it once to play music, then left it there. My password wasn't simple, but if someone had seen me type it, or guessed it, they could have logged in. I felt sick. I tried to think logically. Who would do something like that? My family? No, impossible. Then I remembered Samir's words. The way he had been looking around. His restlessness, the late-night phone calls. A sharp chill ran down my spine. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying every conversation, every moment. My mind fought between disbelief and suspicion. By morning, I decided I needed to talk to Alina. Not accuse her, just understand. I called her, my voice carefully neutral. Hey, can we talk? Something strange happened with my account. She hesitated. What do you mean? There were some unauthorized transfers, I said, choosing my words. I think someone accessed my laptop during the reunion. A long pause. Then a shaky breath. Oh, she said softly. Samir mentioned something about that. He said he might have borrowed a little. I froze. Borrowed? What do you mean borrowed? I asked, my throat tightening. Her voice broke. He said he'd pay it back soon. We needed it, okay? The kids, the bills, the house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own brother-in-law had drained my account. And my sister knew. I hung up before I could say anything I'd regret. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down. I stared at the floor, trying to process it. It wasn't about the money. It was about betrayal. Later that day, I went to their house. I didn't announce it. I just showed up. Samir was in the living room, lounging on the sofa with a smug smile. Alina looked pale, anxious. He didn't even bother pretending. You found out, he said, smirking. Look, don't make a scene. We needed it more than you. The room went silent. I felt something inside me snap, but my voice stayed calm. You stole from me, Samir. He shrugged. Borrowed. You've got plenty, don't you? You won't even miss it. I looked at my sister, who couldn't meet my eyes. You agreed to this? I asked quietly. She whispered. I tried to stop him. My voice dropped to a whisper. Then you won't mind what's coming next. They both stared at me, unsure what I meant. I reached for my bag, standing slowly. Samir laughed, an ugly mocking sound. What's that supposed to mean? He said, grinning at Alina. Before I could answer, a loud bang shook the house. It wasn't thunder. It was something else. The door flew open with a force that made everyone jump. And that's where everything started to change. I'll never forget that moment. The look on their faces, the way time seemed to slow down. My calmness, strange and deliberate, surprised even me. I'd spent my life avoiding conflict, choosing peace over pride. But this time, peace had been stolen from me, just like my savings. And I knew, deep down, that I was not going to let it end there. That night, when I drove home, the rain started to fall in sheets. The windshield wipers fought against the storm, and my reflection flickered in the glass, tired, calm, but different. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just angry. I was focused. Revenge, for me, wasn't about shouting or fighting. It was about clarity, precision, making sure that those who took advantage of my kindness would never mistake it for weakness again. And that's how it all began. The quiet plan that would change everything. When I reached home that night, I sat in my car for a long time before stepping out. The rain was still falling, steady and unrelenting, tapping on the windshield like a clock counting down to something inevitable. My fingers were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wasn't angry in the loud, messy way people imagine anger. I wasn't screaming or crying. I was silent, completely, dangerously silent. Inside, the house felt emptier than usual. Every corner seemed to echo with memories of the reunion, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the trust I had placed so easily in people I called family. I made tea, not because I was thirsty, but because I needed something normal to do, something to ground me. As the kettle whistled, I whispered to myself, calm down, think clearly. I sat by the window, staring at the city lights, and went over everything in my head. Samir's arrogance, Alina's silence, the way they justified stealing from me. They didn't even feel guilt. They felt entitlement. That, more than anything, burned. For years, I had been the dependable one, the sister who lent money without being asked, who remembered birthdays, who drove across town when someone needed help. I never expected anything in return. I believed that kindness would come back in its own time, but now I saw it differently. Some people don't see kindness as generosity. They see it as an invitation to take more. I spent the next morning talking to the bank again. They confirmed the transfers once more, each one going to an account in Samir's name. When I asked about reversing them, the officer sighed. "If it was authorized from your device, it will be difficult," she said politely. "You could file a police report, but since it's family..." Her sentence trailed off as if she already knew I wouldn't do it. And she was right. I didn't want police. I didn't want scandal. I wanted justice, quiet, clean, personal. I began by gathering information. Not the kind you find in files or papers, but the kind you get when you really start observing someone. Samir liked to think of himself as untouchable, the clever one who could outsmart everyone. But arrogance leaves traces. It makes people careless. I watched his social media accounts, his business claims, the people he tagged in photos. He was still pretending to live large, still lying to everyone about his success. Through an old friend who worked in finance, I learned that Samir's so-called business was crumbling. He had taken loans in his company's name, used other people's money to invest, and lost almost all of it. He wasn't helping his family. He was drowning, and he had dragged my sister into it. That realization hurt more than anything. Alina, my sweet, quiet sister, had once been my best friend. We used to share everything, clothes, secrets, dreams. And now she had chosen to protect a man who stole from me. I spent nights replaying our childhood in my mind. The way she used to wait for me after school. The way we used to whisper in the dark about the future. How did we end up here? How did greed and pride replace loyalty and love? It took me several weeks to come up with a plan. Not a spontaneous act of revenge, but something calculated, precise, and completely legal. I started by reaching out to one of Samir's investors, someone he had scammed months earlier. The man was furious, still trying to recover his lost money. When I told him that Samir had stolen from his own family, he wasn't surprised. "That explains everything," he said bitterly. Together, we began piecing things together. I gave him screenshots of transactions, proof of Samir's activity, and small details he could use to strengthen his complaint. I didn't need to file my own report. I just had to make sure the right people had the right information. Meanwhile, I contacted a lawyer friend to quietly look into Samir's company. She discovered unpaid taxes, false declarations, and forged documents. Every step uncovered another lie. It was like pulling a thread that slowly unraveled an entire web. During this time, I kept my calm exterior. When my parents asked about the reunion, I smiled and said it went well. When Alina texted, I replied politely but briefly. I wanted her to think I was moving on. I wanted them both to believe I had let it go. Inside, I was watching their world begin to crack. One evening, about a month later, Alina called. Her voice trembled. "He's in trouble," she said. "Someone reported him. The bank froze our accounts. I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes listening. I could almost picture her sitting on the edge of their couch, wringing her hands, panic in her voice. "I'm sorry, Alina," I said quietly, "but you should have stopped him when you could." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "Was it you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Over the next few days, things spiraled quickly for them. Investigators reached out. His business partners turned their backs. The fancy car was repossessed. Their house, rented in someone else's name, was seized. Samir's arrogance crumbled piece by piece. But revenge isn't always about destruction. It's about balance. I didn't want him ruined completely. I wanted him to understand loss, the kind that humbles, that teaches. I reached out to Alina again. This time, I invited her to meet me at a small cafe we used to love as kids. She came looking pale, her eyes swollen from crying. We sat there in silence for a long moment before she finally said, "Why didn't you just talk to me?" "I did," I said gently. "But you already chose your side." She looked down. "He said he'd pay it back. He said you wouldn't understand." I believed him. I stirred my coffee slowly. "You should have believed me." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a second, the anger inside me softened. She was still my sister, still that little girl who used to hold my hand when she was scared. I didn't want to hurt you, I said quietly. But I needed you to see what kind of man you married. Maybe now you'll stop protecting him and start protecting yourself. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. He's different now. I think he finally realizes what he did. Does he? I asked. Or is he just scared? She didn't answer. When she left, I stayed behind, watching the empty coffee cup in front of me. A part of me felt lighter. Another part felt hollow. Revenge doesn't give back what you lost. It just evens the scales for a while. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding. I worked longer hours, took on new clients, and reminded myself why I started my business in the first place. Every step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. But Samir wasn't done yet. People like him rarely are. When cornered, they look for someone else to blame. He began spreading stories, that I had framed him, that I was jealous, that I wanted to destroy his life. At first, I ignored it, but when those lies reached my parents, I realized silence wouldn't protect me anymore. So, I decided to tell the truth. I invited my family to dinner one Sunday evening. The same warmth that had filled our reunion now felt distant, but necessary. When everyone had settled, I opened my laptop and projected the bank records, the emails, the evidence. I spoke calmly, clearly, without raising my voice once. He took the money, he lied, and when I confronted him, he laughed. This isn't gossip, it's fact. My father's face darkened. My mother covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. Alina sat silently staring at her lap. Samir tried to interrupt, to defend himself, but I didn't let him. You stole my trust, I said, turning to him. But you also stole from your children, from their future. Every lie you told them was borrowed time, and now time's up. The room fell silent. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was just still, the kind of stillness that happens when the truth finally fills the air after years of denial. When I left that night, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had said what needed to be said. In the days that followed, Samir tried to reach me several times. Calls, messages, apologies written in half-truths. I ignored them all. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done, but something unexpected happened after that. Alina began visiting me again. At first it was awkward. Short visits, polite conversations. But slowly the distance began to fade. She found a job, started therapy, and eventually moved out of the house she had shared with Samir. One evening, she came over with the kids. We cooked together just like we used to. She looked happier, lighter, free in a way I hadn't seen in years. When she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "Thank you. For everything, even for the hard parts." That night, as I watched her drive away, I realized something. Revenge isn't always about punishing others. Sometimes it's about freeing yourself from the pain they caused. And as for Samir, well, the world has its own way of balancing things. He eventually left the city, his reputation in ruins. I heard he's working under someone else now, earning just enough to get by. Maybe that's his lesson, to live with the knowledge of what he lost. I didn't need to ruin him completely. I just needed to remind him that even the calmest person has limits, and sometimes the quietest revenge is the one that echoes the longest. Months passed, and the silence that followed Samir's downfall began to settle into something resembling peace. I often found myself sitting on the balcony in the evenings, sipping tea, watching the city lights shimmer like distant thoughts. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady. Not triumphant, not bitter, just steady. Revenge has a strange aftertaste. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It comes quietly, in moments of calm realization. It's not about seeing someone else suffer. It's about finally breathing without the weight of betrayal on your chest. In the weeks that followed our family dinner, I noticed subtle changes in everyone. My parents, who had once struggled to believe anything bad about their son-in-law, began to see him clearly. My father told me one evening, "You did what needed to be done. Sometimes the truth is the only cure for blindness." I nodded but didn't respond. There was no satisfaction in hearing that, just relief. Alina, meanwhile, was transforming. The fragile, fearful version of my sister I'd seen months ago was slowly being replaced by someone stronger. She started working as a school counselor, using her psychology degree for the first time in years. It made me proud, watching her rebuild her life piece by piece. But there were days when guilt crept in, uninvited, persistent. Late at night, I'd lie awake and wonder, had I gone too far? Could I have forgiven instead of retaliating? The human heart is complicated. It wants justice and peace at the same time, though the two rarely arrive together. I had chosen justice, and maybe peace would come later, in its own quiet way. One afternoon, months after everything had unfolded, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real letter, written in Samir's messy handwriting. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won. It began simply, "I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted to say I understand now." He went on to describe his downfall, how everything he'd built had collapsed after my quiet intervention. He admitted to the loans, the lies, the arrogance. He even admitted that the theft wasn't out of desperation, but pride. He couldn't stand the thought of me being more successful than him. He thought he could take what I had and rebuild faster. By the end of the letter, he wrote, "Losing everything showed me who I am. And it's not who I want to be. You were right to do what you did. I'm sorry. For stealing, for lying, and for making your sister choose between us." I folded the letter slowly and placed it in a drawer. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Words couldn't undo what had been done. Still, something about his tone lingered with me. Not because I believed him, but because I sensed he had finally reached the place I'd hoped he would, the quiet space where remorse lives. Around that time, my life began to shift again, in small but meaningful ways. My business grew faster than I expected. Clients came through recommendations, and my evenings filled with work I actually enjoyed. I hired 2 new employees, both young women just starting out. I saw in them the same hope and naivety I once had, and I promised myself to guide them, to make sure they never lost faith in doing good, just because someone once betrayed them. One Friday evening, Alina invited me to her new apartment. It was small, neat, and warm, with yellow curtains that caught the sunlight in a soft glow. Her kids ran around laughing, their voices bright and innocent. For the first time in years, I saw her truly smile. A real, unguarded smile. We sat together over tea, the same way we had done countless times before life got complicated. She told me about her new routine, her students, her therapy sessions. "It's strange," she said, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. "After everything fell apart, I realized how long I'd been living in fear. I thought if I just stayed quiet, things would get better. But silence only feeds the wrong people." I smiled faintly. "You learned that the hard way." She nodded. "Because of you." I didn't know what to say to that. There's something bittersweet about being someone's lesson. You're proud, but it hurts that it took pain for the other person to grow. As the sun set outside her window, we talked about rebuilding, how healing isn't about forgetting, but about learning to live differently. Before I left, she hugged me tightly and said, "You may think what you did was revenge, but I think it was protection." That night, those words stayed with me. Protection. Maybe she was right. Maybe revenge, in its calmest form, is just the act of drawing boundaries so firmly that those who hurt you can never cross them again. A few weeks later, I received another unexpected message, this time from Samir's brother. He said Samir had moved to another city, found a modest job, and was living quietly. "He doesn't talk much these days," his brother wrote. "He's different now. Maybe broken, maybe wiser." I didn't respond, but that night, I found myself thinking not about him, but about myself. About how betrayal changes us, not just in anger, but in patience. It forces us to look at who we are when everything feels unfair. When someone takes from you, not just money, but trust, you have 2 choices. You can become like them, or you can rise quietly above them. My revenge hadn't been about destruction. It had been about reclamation, reclaiming my peace, my power, and my boundaries. And that's when I realized something deeper. Revenge can be calm because confidence doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. True strength is quiet. In the months that followed, I started journaling again. I wrote about what happened, not as a confession, but as reflection. Each page became a mirror, helping me understand why I'd done what I did and how it had changed me. Writing turned my anger into clarity. One evening, while reading an old entry, I came across a line I had scribbled in the dark weeks after the betrayal. When you give people too many chances, you don't just lose money, you lose pieces of yourself. I read it aloud and smiled. It was true, but I had stopped giving chances to people who only took. Now, I gave them to myself. I began investing in small joys again, traveling alone, learning pottery, cooking for friends. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. Every sunrise felt like a quiet apology from the universe, as if it were saying, "You made it through." Alina and I became closer than ever. Our bond wasn't the same as before. It was deeper, more honest. There was no pretending anymore. We had seen the worst of each other's choices, and somehow that made our connection stronger. One night, she came over with old photo albums. We laughed at our childhood pictures, our bad haircuts, mismatched clothes, silly smiles. For a while, it felt like nothing had ever gone wrong. Then she turned to me and said softly, "I still don't understand how you stayed so calm through all of it." I smiled. Because anger gives them power. Calm confuses them. She laughed, shaking her head. "You really are something." Maybe I was. Maybe pain had made me sharper, wiser, quieter, but not colder. I refused to let bitterness settle in. As time passed, my story became less about revenge and more about resilience. I never told anyone the full extent of what I'd done. It wasn't about boasting. It was about understanding that some victories are meant to stay private. Then, one morning about a year later, I received a message from an unknown number. It was short. "Thank you for teaching me the cost of greed." No name, but I didn't need one. I deleted it without replying, closed my eyes and whispered a small prayer. Not for him, but for myself. For peace, for closure, for courage to stay kind even when life wasn't fair. And maybe that was the real ending. Not his downfall. Not my triumph, but this quiet acceptance. Today, when people ask about my calm nature, they think it's just my personality. They don't see the battles behind it, the betrayals that shaped it, the storms I learned to stand through without raising my voice. But calmness isn't weakness. It's control. It's the ability to face chaos without becoming part of it. It's revenge served in silence, with grace instead of rage. Sometimes I wonder if Samir ever truly changed, or if guilt simply turned into habit. Maybe he's still out there trying to start over. I don't wish him harm. I hope he finds humility, because that's something money can never buy. As for me, I found what I was really looking for. Not revenge, but release. The freedom to live without resentment. The quiet joy of knowing that the people who once underestimated me now know exactly who I am. I don't need them to say sorry. Their silence is enough. And if I ever see him again, I know what I'll say, not out of spite, but truth. You taught me a lesson I'll never forget, and I hope I taught you one too. Then I'll smile, turn away, and keep walking. Because revenge, when done right, doesn't end with anger. It ends with peace. And that's how my calm revenge began, and how it finally ended. So if you've ever been betrayed, remember this. You don't need to shout to make things right. Sometimes the quietest storms leave the deepest impact. If you liked this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to My Calm Revenge for more stories where strength speaks softly, but never fails to be heard.